understand the times and all of that thing, but like you are responsible to know where you're living and how other cultures are doing life. We have so much information at our fingertips. You cannot say you're blind to it now. Like you just can't. It's everywhere if you want to see it. Now, I will say this, like, get out of your bubble because you're not really going to feel it or understand what a Black woman faces. Like, I'm at a predominantly white church. Why am I here? Because I want, when people see the news, that if you don't have a Black friend, you'll say, oh, this could be Natasha's family.
You know, like I'll catch it. That they still think that, but they're just not saying it.
Okay.
And part of it is because now a woman can be successful. Like I don't rely on anyone. Like when they look at my life, it's like, okay, I'm taking care of myself. I don't need a husband.
Truly, I have heard some of the best teaching from Pastor Greg on women's voices, their significance, their purpose. It's shifted me and my perspective because when I got saved, I was in one church culture. And I remember having a conversation in my 20s around a table with another couple telling them I didn't think women should preach, much less lead a church. And they were like, Katie, there's going to come a point where this is not going to be a conversation anymore. And I just remember feeling so sure.
Just because I don't believe or agree doesn't mean I can't learn from you.
Why did you have to bring that up?
Okay, that one I'm super embarrassed about.
Do you like me?
Do I like you?
Yeah.
As an individual or as a podcast?
Just as a person.
No, I like you.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
And I don't have any interest in appearing to be stronger than I am.
I ain't bow to Nebuchadnezzar's statue. He gonna lead. You feel me?
How do we love people who see the world differently than we do?
What would it look like if we truly loved all of our neighbors? Could listening to their stories be the first step? This is Seacoast Church, and there's way more to talk about.
Well, cool. Thank y'all for being here. We've got Natasha Gray, Katie Walters, Lynne Stroy, and it actually is kind of a heavy environment because of so many losses, and a couple of them we just found out about. So we're going to talk Mary Tyler Moore instead. I appreciate you guys doing your homework assignment. You surely didn't have to, but was it a fun cultural study? Like, was it fascinating?
Fun.
It was.
Well,
had y'all heard about the shit? Have y'all heard of Mary Tyler Moore?
I had honestly never watched it.
I've never watched it.
Have y'all ever watched it?
I have never watched it, but I knew about it.
Yeah, I knew it too.
And you heard of Dick Van Dyke.
Yeah, I
that's
knew
where she got her start.
name, but I just didn't know what it was.
Me either.
And I was like, oof.
Yeah.
So my brother got me into the show in, I think, high school. We were watching Nick at Night, and I was like, oh, this is kind of, and, so I was dabbling around with some episodes, and when I watched the first one, I was like, we gotta talk about this. But I did want to point out some things that you guys may not have been able to pick up on with just the first episode. But I was like, oh my gosh, we know how big Anchorman is, the movie with Will Ferrell. I mean, huge cultural phenomenon. His dog in Anchorman is called Baxter. Well, the news reporter, who's real quirky and dorky and unintelligent, his last name is Baxter. So I just realized that the Anchorman, Will Ferrell's character, is played off of this newscaster, Ted Baxter. Like, there's definitely a correlation there. Wow. And then I don't know if y'all picked up on the boss of this show is Santa Claus on Elf. Did y'all notice that was who that was?
No. I didn't notice that at all.
And then
No.
Lynn was in culture.
I was like...
And she was in culture.
My mind was somewhere else.
Yes.
From the theme song.
So that's what grabbed me, was the theme song. I'm listening to it. And here's what's crazy is I did a little bit of digging. They departed from those lyrics the very next season. The very next season is not the same lyrics. So let me read the lyrics of season 1, what you guys heard.
How will you make it on your own? This world is awfully big. Girl, this time you're all alone. But it's time you started living. It's time you let someone else do some giving.
might.
You
You
might
might just make it after all. You might just make it after all. So season 2, I tried to find the history and whether or not there was like a backlash, because this show came out in 1970. The very next season, it's who can turn the world on with her smile, who can take a nothing day and suddenly make it seem worthwhile. Well, it's you, girl, and you should know it. With each glance and every little movement, you show it. But here's the big change at the end. Love is all around, no need to waste it. You can have the town, why don't you take it? You're gonna make it after all. Instead of you might just make it after all, you're gonna make it. Thoughts?
Yeah. I had all the feelings.
Yeah.
Yes. Me too.
I was like, might. Yeah, that episode, that song.
You're not going to watch Mary Tyler Moore?
I am not going to watch it. I was telling Natasha, I was like, I'm glad, I feel thankful that the Lord ordained the set times and locations. And I think he knew Lynne could not have made it during that
just
period
like her,
of time.
she might just make it.
Just the like everything in me. I mean, and I don't even know if like somebody else, like and I don't want to make a generalization, but I don't know if like the average man would listen to that and immediately, as soon as I heard that word might, I just cringed.
Yes.
And just even watching that episode, there were so many things on it. As I was like, everything in me is cringing, and I just don't know. I mean, I think about the women who lived during that time, and they just as strong, just as smart, just as talented, and they navigated that with grace, and they navigated with perseverance. And I don't know that I could have done that. So
that's where I totally disagree, because I'm like, that is you. Like, just like you saying, the women then, I feel like they did navigate it with grace, but strength, because they were pushing an envelope that even in the 70s, we're appalled at now. But for them, they thought they were really like pioneering, moving something forward. But I think about you, that's how I do think about you. You are so strong, and you're still pioneering to me in so many ways, with grace, with the grace that says like, hey, I don't see it like that. And taking your authority. Like, I just think about this weekend and the way you take authority in the places God's put your feet, so
maybe we'll rephrase it to, you wouldn't like to have that burden of living back then.
But you could have done it.
But you that's what's crazy, Katie, is it was ahead of its time. So I read a little biography when she passed away. She was 80 years old when she passed away recently. And it said that the show was ahead of its time. The depiction of a woman unmarried and happy, focusing on the satisfactions of a career, and then the relationship between her and her boss opened the door initially to warm and cordial feelings between a male and female in the office place. And then, and I don't think it got into this with this first episode, but she becomes a really good friend with a guy named Murray. And it says a platonic friendship between members of the opposite sex, untouched by either sex or condescension, was ahead of its time.
Wow.
Just a relationship where there wasn't any romantic feelings. And it says, in forging the season's long story of a woman who wanted to succeed in her field at a time when wife was the most readily available role, Moore's was a sociological victory. Yeah. That is crazy. Yes.
You even kind of saw that in that, and I wasn't going to watch anything past that first episode, but you even kind of saw that with when her boss shows up at her apartment, and she immediately, it's like, oh, this is why you hired me. And then he ends up just it being something different. So that's interesting to hear you say that and reflect back on.
Yeah, and that when he came over to the apartment, this one caught me off guard, because I have rewatched movies that the four of us grew up with when we were in high school and college. Wedding Singer, for instance. I really like that comedy, but I've watched it now as a 40-year-old, and I'm like, oh my gosh, the things that we accepted back then as funny, I was like offended. Like there's a scene where they're at a what's the Jewish celebration when kids yes they were basically celebrating and I forgot, an old guy I think put his hands on a woman's behind, and then everybody started doing it, the kids, and it was like supposed to be funny, and I was like, that's not funny anymore. So that's what I wanted to ask you is like what sort of allowances, because when it comes to looking back in time, I always want to try to challenge myself to think back then, because it's easy for me to judge with 2024 perspective. It's almost like a cultural snobbery. Like I can easily look back and be like, that's despicable. How crazy were those people? But they also were a product of their time. So how do you guys allow cultural context and ignorance to inform your thoughts on past and present inequalities, and just in general, gender inequalities, racial inequalities?
Yeah, that's a
good question.
It
right?
is a good question. I'm just thinking like now when I grew up, it's like I did have a 2-parent home, so I saw like my mom playing a servant type of role, like fixing the plate and all this stuff. I think I have taken on some of that a little bit, just in an honoring way. Like, husband, I made dinner, like, here's your food, like, you know. But even with my kids, they all learn how to clean the house. Nobody just takes out, like, it's not just your job to take the trash out. Like, it's all you know what I'm saying? So those kind of different roles, I think I'm kind of trying to play it differently than the way that I grew up, like, a woman can only do. Yeah. You know, that kind of thing, or guys only do. I want to make sure that if you have a home, you should take care of the whole thing. But that's just me as a parent. Yeah, I think I'm done.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know, Joey.
Yeah.
This is tough.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I look back, and this is the one thing that trips me up with how cancel culture works nowadays is we don't take any consideration into how a person became who they are, what they were taught, what sort of environment they were brought up in. And gosh, I'll actually go here. My grandmother is passed away, and I've really tried to help my kids navigate life without going into their whole, like, their peers are big into cancel culture, and you're either good or evil depending on your actions, and let's just write people off. And I've really tried to help them see a little more nuance, especially when it comes to human beings, because we all have the capacity for good and evil. Yeah. So an example that I've used with them, and it's even tricky, and sometimes I'm not too comfortable with it, but I was like, okay, you're Poppy, so that's their great grandmother, that's my grandmother. I said, do you think that she grew up or do you think that she passed away in her 90s thinking and living out equality amongst races? Like, do you think that she saw blacks and whites as completely equal? And they're like, probably not. And I said, do you think that your grandma is a super hate-filled, bitter, antagonistic to other races or evil woman? They're like, no. And I said, well, let's really think about this. How was she brought up? Well, she was brought up, she was born in the 20s, so it doesn't take us much long to gather our thoughts on what sort of world she grew up in. And I said, did your grandma change throughout her lifetime? And they were like, yes, because, she was, this is where she stopped when it came to seeing races as equal. Like, I would come over to the house, she's just like, and I have this black friend at church, and we're just so we talk to each other. Like, it was a big deal, and it made her happy. It wasn't, I can't believe this woman showed up at church. It was, but to her, there was a distinction. That was her there's a black friend at church. You know what I'm saying? So we can see as a younger generation, oh, wow, why can't you just say friend? But that's a huge difference from my dad has memories of him in the backyard playing. I mean, he's probably 7, and he's playing with a little black girl who is around the same age. And his mom goes out into the yard, picks him up, and says, "No, Virgil, we don't play with kids like that." So that was her in her 20s. Fast forward to when she's in her 90s, and she changed tons. And I wanted our kids to realize her racism that she died with is not okay. But man, did your great grandma change a lot. So, that's the kind of stuff that I just think that we don't pay enough attention to. But I also don't want to get into any sort of territory that excuses
That's right.
based on ignorance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the cultural, like you said, the word you said, I think, was what cultural allowances do we make today for the ways things haven't progressed? And when I think about women, I do think that we have a supernatural capacity to make these cultural allowances and shift and move the conversation, the mentality forward. I think about the 2 women at this table, like with Natasha and Lynne. For me, through, it probably started more through Mother Emanuel and then through 2020, like Natasha was teaching me and allowing me to grow and change so much, even when it came to race for my own self, and then for Lynne, she's constantly done that for me too, and also in the ways of being a pastor, being called, anointed in the church without being a pastor's wife. It shows me there's so many blind spots I have towards that, what it's like to be a woman called that's not called alongside of her husband. And I feel like, I know she's made so many cultural allowances for me to move towards seeing more clearly, not having those blind spots. And I think it's because of love. So I think women have this capacity to love and fortitude that can help us to be those pioneers, to move the conversation forward at the right pace that doesn't divide, doesn't alienate people, doesn't judge or push them aside. And I think it might be while we look back on history and we see women as kind of the forerunners of progression because of our capacity to change, just like your grandmother, and our capacity to love and make those needed allowances to help people see, the blind spots that they have.
Yeah. And I even think about it this way, and I'm totally opening myself up for you guys to bust me big time because I'm white and I'm a male. But I even feel like if we don't take ignorance into consideration, then, and I'm really just piggybacking what Katie just said, we lose an opportunity to help that person along. Because it seems like nowadays it's like, oh, you're ignorant? Well, you're bad because of what you think and what you just said. And so I don't want anything to do with you. You stay clear. I don't want a friendship with you. I don't want to get to know you. What you said makes you bad. And you know that it's ignorance. Well, you don't always know that, but a lot of times you can be like, this person is just ignorant. Well, you just blew an opportunity to help someone in their ignorance. Bottom line is the ignorance is offensive. But if it's ignorance, it's ignorance.
Yeah.
And how do you help that person that doesn't know any better?
Yeah. It's so hard. I think it's a walking day by day in every situation. Because we even think, I loved this past Sunday, Pastor Greg spoke and he said, we always judge people by their actions, but we judge ourselves by our motives.
That's right. That was good.
That just like cut to the bone. But I think about when we go on mission trips, even though there's something that we may not agree with, like we submit to that because like going to Africa in certain countries, we're not going to show our knees if we're women. And so we're wearing a longer dress than we would in America. We don't agree with that, but we lose influence if we step into somebody's culture and we are doing something that we know offends them. And so we do that when we go on mission. But we don't look at everyday life as mission. Yeah. And so I'm like, even in like Pastor Greg saying that, I'm thinking like, where are there places where I haven't made allowance? Because there are, where I will look at ignorance and it'll offend me. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, but you should know. But you're right. I don't think about, how many generations have you lived in this? We were born in a different generation. We were in school from day one with people who look different than us, and our parents' generation were not. And so even with the male versus female, just thinking about, sometimes it's hard for me. I was at Publix once buying this is many, many years ago in Columbia. I was buying a rotisserie chicken, and there was an older man in line behind me, and he made a comment about how I am not going to find a husband if I don't cook my own food.
Oh my God.
He was very, very old. And I to this day, I shared that with somebody the other day. Cause I'm he was in front of me. He saw I didn't have a ring, and he made a comment about me buying pre-cooked food, and maybe I would find a husband if I would. And so I was wow, angry up until this moment about that. Yes. But it never occurred to me to think about. Yeah. But to think about yes, that was an ignorant comment. It was offensive to me. But even the navigating of he grew up in a world where women didn't work outside the home. And even my mom, my brother and I both had equal chores. It's because she was one of 8. She was one of the oldest girls. Her dad did not believe that the boys would do any housework. They didn't cook. They didn't clean. And so she would always make comments about how dad didn't believe that the boys should do any of that. And so in her house, we both did it.
That's it.
And so just to think about that, I just don't think about I'm so grace-filled when I'm going on mission into another culture, but I never think that a different generation is another culture.
Yeah. And I mean, you say that guy, ignorance and mind your own business, though. I mean, there's a little bit of would be
but back
audacity.
in the day, anybody would tell you anything.
Yeah.
And you think about, there was a generation where anybody could even my growing up where uncles and aunts corrected you or strangers corrected you, and that was accepted in that generation. And so yes, mind your own business, but there was a generation where you didn't mind your own business. Everybody's business was your business.
Well, here's the tough one for me. You will go to a third world country where you know what their cultural norms are and adapt accordingly. And I would feel the same way. It's just come on, it's a different culture. But if I stepped into a church in America who expected women to cover their knees, I would have a completely different response. But the ignorance is the same. You said different generations. Well, wouldn't you have to say different religions and the cultures that reside within those circles of faith? But I would have a hard time with it.
Even if the ignorance is the same, the responsibility is different. So, when you go on mission, Pastor Francis used to always tell me, if you move over here as a missionary, the one thing you lose is the right to affect our culture. You're not going to be able to shift and move our culture. You can serve our culture, but you can't shift it. But serving here on mission, it's our responsibility to shift and move our culture. So I don't think that means that we just walk into any place and accept whatever cultural norms stay. Mm-hmm. I think it's just the path at which we do that.
Yeah.
And like you're saying, what is the priority? And if you're coming to, I don't know, I'm assuming your value or priority is to share a message of hope or share the gospel or shift people to a kingdom mentality. So maybe you would wear a skirt if it was this kind of environment. Hopefully it's not, but I'm just saying you would wear it to not lose that moment, of that authority. But I do think you got to constantly balance what's the priority of the moment. Yeah. And then what's my responsibility to still move people.
Yeah. How do you hear my grandma's situation?
So my mom was one of the ones who had to go and get her food from the back of the restaurant. So I've always been aware of difference. Honestly, and I've said this before, I did not really feel race until I married a Black man. I never was treated different. We've always gone in the environments where we are the minority, right? Mm-hmm. But I never, nobody ever had, said a racial slur to me or anything like that. It's when I married a Black man that I found out, oh my goodness, racism is really real. So when you get the phone call that he's like being pulled over by the police, and it's like, I don't know if he's going to make it out of this. Like, or you see like he's on a gig and they've pulled over now they just played a wedding reception. So all of the black guys are being pulled over on the way home, but none of the white guys. Like, it's blatant. So yes, I feel like I understand the times and all of that thing, but like Katie is saying, like, you are responsible to know where you're living and how other cultures are doing life. We have so much information at our fingertips. You cannot say you're blind to it now. Like, you just can't. It's everywhere if you want to see it. Now, I will say this, like, get you some different kind of friends right now. Like, intermingle yourself. Like, make it a priority to get out of your bubble, because you're not really going to feel it or understand what a black woman faces. Like, I'm at a predominantly white church. Why am I here? Because I want, when people see the news, that if you don't have a black friend, you'll say, oh, this could be Natasha's family, and have some empathy there. That's why I'm here. Like, yes, I'm a Christian and I love everyone, but I also want people to see me. Understand that it's a real breathing thing. Like, my son is 17. He's driving. My greatest fear is him not making it home. I don't know if all of my friends feel that same way. No. If my white friends feel it, my Asian friends, if my Indian, I don't know if everybody's feeling the burden that I feel. Like, I carry this daily. And so it's just a different way to live. So yes, I definitely have like compassion and sympathy for your grandma, but I'm like, at this point, get in the know. Hurry up and do it fast, because we're suffering in different small ways, but we are still like, yes, I'm proud to be an American, but it's hard here. I'm not gonna act like it's not. It's different. It's just different for us. And I want people to hear that without saying, oh, you're just playing a racism card. And that's not what I'm playing. Like, I have to prepare my children for whatever they may face. Just like if they're learning how to ride a bike, okay, we need knee pads, we need helmets, we need all the things. Like, I can't just send them out here in the unknown. Yeah. Like, everything is fine for everyone. It's not. It's just not. Yeah, I'm going on a rant. I'm sorry.
No. Well, and I think what was heartbreaking for a lot of Black people when this conversation exploded in the church because of some of the stuff that was going on. I mean, we could name names of the many who were killed, is what you desire to see at Seacoast, which I think did happen. A lot of Black people realize, oh, you don't even care to hear my heart. Like, I've been in your community. We've been calling each other brothers and sisters. I have a vastly different perspective, and you don't even care. In fact, you're even saying what I'm saying is offensive. Right. I've seen a lot of people leave the church, the organized church, because of it. Yeah. All right. Well, let's back to Mary Tyler Moore. Then I want to ask you guys some more women questions. But it felt like, or it feels like, watching multiple episodes, it's almost like a scarlet letter so the character that Mary Tyler Moore plays is Mary Richards, and it's like a scarlet letter that she's single and in her 30s. Yeah. That's definitely changed a lot. Maybe not as much in the South, but as a whole, has that changed a lot?
I think it has changed, and maybe in a sense of people are not as vocal about what they're thinking. I think there's still a generation that it's under the surface. That you'll hear, I'll hear like every now and then my dad or my uncles they'll say something that I'll I'll catch it, that they still think that, but they're just not saying it. And part of it is because now a woman can be successful. Like I don't rely on anyone. Like when they look at my life, it's like, okay, I'm taking care of myself. I don't need a husband.
You're gonna make
I
it.
just might make it.
No, I went season 2. I went season 2.
But I do hear it. And my dad made a comment years ago. Maybe it was like 2019. He said, it was like a passing, like, oh yeah, I've given up on being a grandfather, and so like they still like they do, like they still like the way that they relate to my cousins who are married and have kids. It's a little bit different. So you don't hear it in culture, right? But I think that it's simmering there. But it is a lot different. Yeah, there was never a question that my dad was like, this is what you're supposed to do. Like your purpose is in being married and being a wife. So I haven't seen that. I do feel like there's a difference in that, like you're not without purpose if you are not married. But I do think there's still some of that under the surface.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, is it a Black thing for them to expect us to be married already? Because I know, like, my sister... She's 9 years older than me. I don't want to say her age. But like she's never been married. And it's kind of like, I feel like she kind of lives like an incompleteness. You know what I'm saying? She might not vocalize it always, but just like, because me and my siblings.
Like
I have
she
two
feels
other,
that way? She
feels like she hasn't, hit this milestone.
Right.
Because it is the expectation, I guess. Overall in general. But yeah, I was just wondering if it was a Black culture thing for us to feel
it
that.
Might be.
But,
and because even when after college, when I wanted to live on my own, in my dad's head, he didn't understand why I was gonna not live with them. As a single person. And so it's like and you do see culture. That.
Yes.
It's that you stay with your family until you get married. And true. There's not a reason to, and I was like, oh no, I'm not. That may be Black culture.
Yes, for sure. Yes. I know a lot of older women and in their 30s who still are at home.
Because they're not married.
Correct.
And I even wondered, in 1970, when those song lyrics were being sung, what would not making it look like? Her having to go back to her parents, going back home?
Yeah, back home.
Yes.
True.
Gosh. Or, because if you don't find a husband, you may not be able to make it, so you may have to go back home.
You might not make it.
You might just make it.
And because even to the point of that whole episode, it's like the only reason why she was trying to work is because she didn't get married. Right? The only reason that she was out in the world.
That's true.
Because he wouldn't marry her, now she had to figure out what she was going to do. And so that is like...
Yeah.
That's really true.
The thing that really shocked me is, I don't know, I mean, y'all had to have remembered this because it was like, whoa, because I thought I was like, they did that in the 1970s. Like, I felt like the humor was ahead of its time in a bad way. But when Lou Grant, the boss, was over at her apartment, he said something about her caboose. Yeah. Like he talked about her butt. Yeah. And I was like, and it almost wasn't even a joke. He just referred to it. And I was like, whoa, that was kind of crazy.
Yeah.
Do y'all know the first sitcom that actually had a husband and wife in bed together? Like basically just sleeping together?
Wow, I was going to say I Love Lucy, but it might not be
Cosby Show?
Brady Bunch.
Really?
Oh, yeah. It was the first time. Like if you watch old sitcoms in the 50s or 60s, the husband and wife are sleeping in separate beds.
Yeah. Because I was thinking I Love Lucy. I think they had separate beds.
Yeah. It was just inappropriate for TV.
Or you never even saw them.
In the bedroom.
Right.
Wow.
So we had over the course, Lynne pointed out over the course of like 3 episodes, but one episode was really dedicated to talking about the Billy Graham rule. And Pastor Chip made a really interesting comment. He said, how long has it been that women have had a solid hand in the workforce? And we all answered, it hasn't been that long. And he's like, exactly. Like we have to have patience with the process. Everybody's not just going to catch on all of a sudden and be like, oh, okay, this is how it's done. How happy or unhappy, pleased or displeased are y'all with the current cultural climate in America when it comes to women in the workplace, equality, inequality? Like, it's easy for me to look at you three and be like, oh, things are a lot better now. I mean, things have progressed. You guys, y'all couldn't even vote, 50 or 60 years ago.
Oh my God. I think the thing, the dig,
that was a joke. That was a joke.
No, but the dig is like, you've always been able to, like, and I think that's just crazy to even say. Like, Joey, you have so many things you can do. I'm so proud of you. Like, oh my God. So for you saying, it's just like, it just feels cringy.
Yeah.
It's just cringy.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and I will say, because I think it's very interesting that somebody that the four of us love who's on staff did not want to be in this conversation because of what we were talking about, because it's like, I can talk about more things than just women stuff. I'll catch up on a different conversation. And I hopefully you guys don't feel offended, because I get that also. I definitely believe that you guys have more to the bring more to the table than just women stuff.
Yeah.
But how do y'all feel about someone who would say things are a lot better now? I mean, we've made tons of progress, because I think that's what most people think. And I would even go so far as to say, I think we've made a lot of progress. I don't know how much, but as women, how do you guys process that? Have we made a lot of progress?
I think it's an answer of yes and yes, but. We've made a lot of progress. We can vote. I can live by myself. I can own property in my name. So I think, yes, we have made a lot of progress. I think this is the tendency in everything, is that you start to make progress and then you get comfortable and you don't ask questions about, and that doesn't mean that everything has to look a certain way. And I might, you can email Joey if you, if this rubs you the wrong way.
My email address is Lynne Stroy at Seacoast.org.
But I wouldn't say that I'm championing necessarily that everything a man does, a woman does. I don't feel that way. And so when you're talking about...
explain that, because some people will hear that as there's certain things that males can do that females can't, or are you saying should? Are there certain roles or characteristics?
I mean, I think when it comes to like, can a woman be a doctor? Yes. When we're talking like profession and things, but I think that there is a difference between men and women, and it's nuanced. And so I can't sit here and unpack all of it, but when I talk about women being equal, and I look at like, God created them male and female, and they like, woman came from man, and they're together are a complete expression of our God. But there are facets that, like, he intentionally pulled apart one and made different facets in the two. And so when I'm talking about equality, it doesn't mean sameness, if that makes sense. And I don't know how to unpack that in the time that we have. But in terms of like vocation, yes, I think women can do a lot of things men do. Anyway, so in talking about equality, I think, yes, we've come a long way. I don't want to like push out men. So in elevating women to a place of dignity and honor, does not mean like bashing men and pushing men aside in the role that they have. I still like the two being together in the workplace. But so I think, yes, we've come a long way, but that doesn't mean that we stop here. And I think of just the way that the world works, like you can apply for things, but most people get promoted through networking. Most people, like you look at our society and there is still very much a system in some places where you're only getting here because of who you know or what circle you're in. And so if you're not intentional about that, then you're not going to intentionally have women in those circles. You're not going to intentionally be in those relationships. And so we were just, even yesterday I was with some friends and she lives near the port. So we were staying on the water watching one of those big cargo ships come in. And she was just talking about the tugboat system, which is, but how a lot of the people who are tugboat captains, it's been in their family, right? And so there's some industries you just don't get into because you just want to do it. Yeah. You get into it because you're in the family, you know someone. And so there are some places and some tables women just aren't going to be at because nobody's been intentional in bringing them in. Yeah. So we've come a long way, but if we just stop and say, everything's great, we don't keep asking the question of where should women be, but they're not.
Yeah. I think if we can see a constant progression of don't stop. Like, don't stop. Don't stop coming to wherever. Like, being open to, like, if you see that somebody's missing, like, you need to probably ask them to come. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you notice it's an all-male group and I just think everybody has something to offer. I just really do. Man, there's so many different things in my head that I don't know about because I'm not asking someone different. Like if I only just talk to my girlfriends about my issues, I'm not going to have a male's perspective either.
That's right.
Like, so I think it's all necessary.
Yeah. Right. And that's where I do think the conversation, like you said, of hearing people's perspective, I mean, even connecting that back to the race conversation is a lot of it is just hearing the perspective that you don't have. And I think for women, while, I do think it's important to have the conversation about women's issues, to give a perspective on it, because when it comes to careers and lanes, you only know your perspective. So like for me, my stepmother, she's 86. And when I was asking her what she wanted to be, she was a teacher for 40 some years. She's like, I didn't like kids. I didn't want to be a teacher. But she was like, do you know the opportunities available for me? Teacher, secretary. That was it. And then my mom wanted to be in ministry. She felt called to ministry and felt like the only opportunity for her in that time was in children's ministry. And she didn't really want to go into children's ministry. So then I go to career thinking, I'll do anything. The world's open to me, and thought I wanted to be in news broadcasting. Well, a lot of the women I know that did that career path, what it took to rise, would make some of us like shudder to think of what they've gone through, where we might not have gone through that kind of objectification in the church. We've had our own struggles, So I chose education, school counselor, because I was like, well, I could do anything. I could be a principal. Like that field has become more open, more equal. Then when it came to ministry, we were in a Southern Baptist church. I also felt called to ministry, and there was no spot for that. If you couldn't sing or be in children's ministry in the decade in our 20s when we started, there was no opportunity for that. So I think just
So it was a Bible-believing church. Okay, go ahead, Katie.
Well,
I'm just kidding.
Stop.
Kidding.
Joey Svendsen at Seacoast.
Exactly. That's right. All Southern Baptists are like, an amen. And an amen, Joey.
I can't help but to laugh, and then I have to be careful because it's really messed up. But anytime I hear that women are only qualified to teach children, I'm just like, that is despicably funny. It's like, how archaic can you get? Like, you three, don't you teach anybody but children?
Well,
that is ridiculous.
What I love about that
I'm sorry, I totally interrupted you too.
You did it. It's
okay,
the path.
okay.
You're right.
What I love about that is, like the children, if you don't teach them when they're young, like what did God tell the Israelites? Tell this to your children when you wake up, when you lie down, when you're walking along the road. It's like if it's not taught to them when they're children, they're not going to have it when they're older. And so it's so interesting that the most important and formidable years in a
Jesus'
child's
favorites.
life
Yeah,
is like the women get to teach them. And even like having worked in children's ministry, served in it, continue to serve in it, there is a very small percentage of men who serve in children's ministry. And it's so like, you think of King Josiah, who his father was wicked, but he loved the Lord. You know, like you think about Timothy, whose mom was a believer and grandmother was a believer, but his father was Greek. You know, it's like all of the, I have all the feelings about that. But anyway.
All right, so we're not going to make anybody feel uncomfortable, but how do y'all feel that Seacoast is doing with women leadership? Nobody?
I mean, I will say, truly, I have heard some of the best teaching from Pastor Greg on women's voices, their significance, their purpose. It's shifted me and my perspective because when I got saved, I mean, I was in one church culture. And I remember having a conversation in my 20s around a table with another couple telling them I didn't think women should preach, much less lead a church. And they were like, Katie, there's going to come a point where this is not going to be a conversation anymore. And I just remember feeling so sure about that. And so I will just say, like, from my perspective, I do feel like he has moved the conversation forward. But the church in general still has efforts to make, especially when it comes to pay, discrimination, different discrimination of positions, and even the assumptions that pastors' wives are meant to serve for free. There's a lot of ways that the church still needs to move forward. The godliness around singleness. I mean, I just think about, you talk about that, and is that just a Black culture thing that singleness is less than? I don't think so. I definitely think we still have it prevalent, but I don't understand what has moved away from the fact that somehow there's a view of it's less godly when the apostles and the church leaders of the early church, most of them who were moving the church forward, women and men, were single, and it was revered. They had more to teach because of that. They had more, they could understand the width of God more. They had more accessibility to be able to influence and impact. And I just think there's certain mentalities that I feel like we still are lagging in when it comes to how I think Jesus would and did, continue to honor and treat women. But that's my perspective on church in general. But I feel like Seacoast has moved me along for sure as a woman.
Yeah, I would say me too for sure. When Priscilla and I moved back to Charleston and came on staff at Seacoast, we had already been attending and volunteering for a couple of years, but we moved out to Seattle and we got plugged into what was then known as Mars Hill. And so we came back to Seacoast. We're like, this place is like progressive. We thought Mars Hill was progressive. But listen, they did not have women elders. They were elders' wives. Elders' wives. They weren't elders. They were elders' wives. They didn't believe in any women pastors. And I was like, we have Pastor Betsy here. I mean, Pastor, I could get Jeff Surratt's wife's name. Sherry Surratt. I mean, just
big leader.
Right. And it was just interesting because when I came on, so around that time, if you would have asked me what I thought about women pastors, I would have said, theologically, I don't know how we get away from the fact that we're not supposed to. I don't like it, but I'm just trying to stick with God's word sort of thing. I don't feel that way anymore, but that sermon that we referred to, Pastor Greg, he included women leadership and women teaching in the non-essentials, which I don't think there's any way of escaping the fact that it would be a non-essential just because you can be a Christian church and maybe be wrong in your view when it comes to women stuff. Right. But how do y'all feel about it? It's not an essential.
Yeah, I don't think it's an essential either. Yeah. And even to say that, I think that there's this assumption that if you're a woman, you think one way. And I don't think it's women all have this opinion and men have this opinion, because I've wrestled with it. And in the same way that you have, and I still today kind of go back and forth. And you even asked before we started recording about, and I may be jumping ahead in your questions, but like a female lead pastor. And so I still like, I'm still wrestling with the things. And so I don't think it's necessarily, it has to be a non-essential. Because I think that you can know and love the Lord, and hold on to the essential things. And maybe we're right and maybe we're wrong, but that is not a salvation.
Right.
Eternity issue. But it could be a denominational. You can be at a church that's like, okay, we believe this thing. And it's like, okay, well, that's what you believe. And you're in your church and you're operating that way.
And it's not like there's nothing in the Bible that confuses this a bit when it comes to reading and being like, maybe women shouldn't teach. It's not like that the Bible's absent of any wrenches, and how the four of us think through this.
We probably see more evidence of women lead pastors in the Bible than we do of women preaching. I mean, in just Phoebe, Lydia, the ones who hosted them in their homes, in the early church. So I do think you're right. Like, it can feel complicated when you're just looking at those certain parts of Titus and Timothy, and as far as women preaching, speaking to all.
So, woman senior pastor, what do y'all think? I say, heck yeah.
I mean, yeah.
Thanks, Joey.
I'm a pastor. I feel like I'm not saying this that I want to lead a church.
To be clear.
Let me say that.
Do not ask me.
I'm not saying that at all, but I'm thinking, I'm with that.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. So, see if y'all can follow this line of thinking and this question. So we all realize that there are nuances with how male and females are perceived. I think what you were saying a second ago, Lynn, and I would agree with you that there are certain things that we could say, there's some common ground that we can make some stereotypes maybe about male and female. Like, there's some common ground. There's some common characteristics. Women in many ways are a certain way, and males in many ways are a certain way. Is that fair? Ish.
I guess I need examples, but yes, okay. I'll say it's fair.
So do you think that there are qualities that are more common with women that we need to see more of at the highest level of leadership? And I'll give you an example. When it comes to a woman president, if somebody said, do you want a woman president? I would say, well, first of all, it depends on the woman, just like it would depend on the man. If you ask me, would you want a male president? I'd be like, well, it depends on who the guy is. But I would say I am oh my gosh, I am so looking forward to, if it's a good candidate, what she could bring to the table. And I could be wrong in this assessment, but I think she could bring something to the table that is very common amongst women that is lacking as a whole with men. Yeah. So the sort of differences that we see are relatively common amongst male and females. We need what women bring to the table at that highest level. Mm-hmm. Now, that's not to say that there's tons of things that both male and females can both be really good at or really bad at, but imagine a super assertive, loving woman who doesn't take crap from people, but has the, emotional maturity that I see most women have, and the ability maybe to hear other perspectives. I don't know. Are y'all following me at all?
I am. Yeah. I would say, and even in that, yes, what women bring to the table, I think part of it for me, in any organization, whether it's the church, a country, a business, whoever's at the top, and this is the intentionality, because no one person's going to bring everything. Mm-hmm. And it's just like Natasha was saying, like, you need other voices, because if I'm just talking to women, I'm lacking the men's perspective. And so I think what we haven't seen done well across the board, is when there's a man at the top, it doesn't necessarily have to be the person who's at the top. It's whose voices are influencing him or speaking, not influencing, but who's he listening to? Who's a partner in that? And we see that in Seacoast, right? Right now, Pastor Josh and Lisa are co-lead pastors, but Lisa's voice has always been in that. So since Josh has stepped in when on paper, technically he was just the lead pastor on his own, you still saw Lisa's voice in there. Like you still saw she was leading, even if her name wasn't co-lead pastor as it is now, because they've operated that way. And so I would say when you're in an environment where the person at the top does not have other perspectives, because no leader is going to have everything. And their job is to make sure that they have voices at the table and people around them that they can trust, that they're hearing that input. So yes, I think if we had a woman president one day, we're going to see a different expression of the leading in that office than we would have under a man. But she's still going to need, because you can easily swing the other direction where like you're only leading out of these perspectives and you're missing the other one. So I think whatever it is, yes, she's going to bring something that's different. But you're also going to still need to surround yourself with different voices. I think with president, the thing that I would love to see a female president. I think the thing that I wonder, and we've seen that with having female secretaries of state, is like we live in a culture where women are accepted and can do everything. It doesn't look like that around the world. And so when you have a country leader who can't interact with other country leaders in the same way, I wonder what that now. If you have a Secretary of State who can fill that gap, that's a little bit different. But I do wonder what it looks like when what relationship you have. And even like thinking about Condoleezza Rice and Hillary Clinton, both of them, how they would have to navigate those relationships with like those diplomatic tables when they like other countries don't look at women the same way. So it's so interesting to see those dynamics at a country level.
Yeah. And I think what excites me too is and there were some radicals back in the 50s and 60s also who would fit this description, but there are enough males now to where a woman president could surround herself with males and females, but the males specifically would have no problem flourishing under a woman's leadership. Right. Zero problem. I mean, I've had multiple, when I was in the school system, multiple female bosses, and I mean, to me, I would say, well, my experiences weren't better with females, but just as good.
Yeah.
I mean, there wasn't one part of me that was just like, I'm a dude here and I've got a woman boss, not
It's interesting you say that, because I think what I admire and have admired so much about women is the same thing that I'm admiring about men in this generation, and men like Pastor Greg that we were just talking about, is I've admired this strength under submission, this fortitude portrayed as meekness, that is selfless for the good of others, not just for power, not just for ambition, not just for their own selves, but for selflessness. I feel like I've admired watching women walk into that in leadership with those qualities, because they're Christ-like to me. I feel like that's what he did, is stripped himself of all power, all entitlement, and put this strength and power under submission to walk forward in meekness. And I see so many men right now doing that as well. Like even you, and having this conversation, just the meekness to say, what's your perspective on this? Help me understand this blind spot. This is how I saw it, but did you guys see it differently? Which is what gives me so much hope of whether it's a woman or a man, if we could see qualities like that. Now, do we have a system that ever gets anyone elected like that? That's my biggest question.
Well, that's true.
It's a whole other episode.
Exactly.
I've heard these sentiments recently in a political discussion where a woman who I love and respect greatly said something to the effect of, anybody, when it comes to the President of the United States, anybody but another old white male. Like, I mean, can we have a different race? Can we have a female? And I totally understand those sentiments. I really do. And there's a part of me that's just like, yeah, heck yeah, that'd be, I would like that too. But isn't that perspective on white males, white straight males, whatever you call them, isn't that prejudice? Like, I looked up what prejudice is, and this isn't some sort of a big defense. I'm offended by these sentiments, not at all. But prejudice is preconceived opinions that's not based on reason or actual experience. So my answer to, would you be cool with another old white president? I'd be old white male president. I'd be like, depends on who he is.
Yeah.
It's
the same thing.
Maybe not.
Yeah, it depends on who he is. And I
would say the same thing about a woman president. I don't want just any woman to run our country. Yeah. I mean, it's the same whichever gender.
But it's like, who's getting the opportunity? I think that's the question
point.
that goes in my head. Like, who is actually getting the opportunity is majority white, older men.
That's a good point.
And like you said, the way our system is set up in terms of what the amount of money that it takes to campaign, and to, it just kind of lends itself to who would be able to do this. We haven't seen, well, I'm not going to get into that. Never mind.
Come on, Lynne, please.
I gotta stop right there. So I cannot get more emails.
Right. Because you do know you're getting one. I understand you're getting one. At least one.
At least one. I love how part of Lynne's plan at this table is to avoid emails.
Well, the good news is most people misspell my name. So some of them are just going out into la la land.
Oh, sweet.
All right, so I want to wrap up this episode with another important thing to get out there, and that's the Chosen Conference. And I thought we would start with Lynne here, because Lynne, over the years podcasting with you, I have found that you are more cynical than me. And I love that about you, because it makes me feel better about myself.
Oh my goodness,
that's amazing.
So, and I say that because I know that you would not give fluff to this question. Okay. Do you think God has chosen? See what I did? Chosen to do special things through. Like, God's like, I'm going to be a part of this. And because I think we would all say, you walk into a Seacoast church, God's just here. And we hear that from people who's never been here before. Has God chosen the same sort of relationship with the Chosen Conference?
And I would say yes, but I wouldn't say it's because it's the conference itself. And I've gone to every Chosen Conference since the beginning, when your mom was leading the women's ministry. And I think the Lord comes where he is invited and his people are seeking him. And so I have seen that with a conference team. And so I don't think it's just because it's the Chosen Women's Conference and he's like doing something specific with the conference. I think he's doing something with his servants who are like, hey, we're listening to you and we're following you. And so I've seen that increase over the years with Chosen. And I see, even right now at the Mount Pleasant campus, every Monday, there's a prayer group. And that consistency of that prayer group birthed out of the team starting to pray throughout and so even they will tell you, like, the encounters that they're having with the Lord outside of that one night are even better than what has happened in that one night. Mm-hmm. And so that, I think Chosen is just like what's fallen out of the cup of what's happening every day.
Yeah, I was going to say the overflow, because I think they're so intentional about just sisterhood, just really making it that bonding moment. Like, here we can come and gather together and pull from the strength from each other. Like, it's probably one of my favorite things, truly, because I just feel like I can sit in the floor and cry if I need to, and everybody will understand. I won't feel or look weird doing that, like that expression as a woman, like a safe space that I can come into. So I'm excited.
Yeah. I think about it as, I think the older I get, the less simple things get and the less answers that I have. But one thing that I do feel like I can say is that I feel like we see God respond to hunger, just like Glenn was saying. And so the hunger to me that has built over Chosen over the decades since it began is supernatural, because basically when you have a church like this that's so excellent, they're going to provide an excellent conference in every way. You don't have to have spiritual hunger from the people, from the leadership, from the anticipation of we want God, we want to see God move. And I think instead, every single year, you've actually watched this spiritual hunger build, which is what I think we see God respond to in a special way.
Yeah.
You know,
our listeners and our viewers will get to hear an unbelievable story that came out of one of the Chosens. You guys won't be able to comment on it because it hasn't been done yet. But would you say that Chosen is for certain types of women? Some women, take it or leave it? Like I just told these ladies, here's Peyton Pickens. You get to hear a snippet of her story. She had an encounter with God at the last Chosen conference in which God dealt with something in her heart, some unprocessed thinking, some unprocessed spiritual resolve that she didn't even realize she needed. And it was about a regretful decision that she made about 10 years ago. All of this happened at last year's Chosen conference. You'll get to hear this full story later on in the fall, right here on this podcast. But here's Peyton Pickens real quick on her story of how God dealt with something in her heart at the Chosen conference last year.
Right after my freshman year of college, I came home for the summer and I went to a friend's party, and there was a guy there that I knew from high school, and we just kind of reconnected, and we're talking about school, and I liked him. We kind of started to date very casually, and at that time, with my relationship with Christ, I grew up in the church. My dad is a pastor, and I did love God, but not enough to set aside like my own will and my desires. And so when I went to college my freshman year, I didn't attend church. I took my Bible with me. I'm pretty sure it sat on my nightstand the whole time, didn't get opened. And so I wasn't rejecting God by any means, and I wasn't, didn't have like hostile feelings towards him, but I was not pursuing relationship with him. I wasn't in my word. And so very quickly the relationship turned intimate, and I was 18, he was 21, and I did feel like I wanted validation. It wasn't that I was I wasn't really into all of that, but I wanted him to love me. Mm-hmm. So we were intimate, and then I just woke up one day and literally knew. Like I wasn't late, didn't have any symptoms. I genuinely woke up and was like, I'm pregnant. And I don't know where it came from, but, I went to work. After work, I stopped by CVS. I got a test. 2, I took them, and they both came up positive. I called him because I didn't have the nerve to tell him in person. And when I called him, I just was like, I've got to talk to you. And he's like, yeah. I'm like, I'm pregnant. And his first response was, okay, I can get you $500. Like very nonchalant. And the fact that I was so naive that I didn't know what it meant is clear that I should not have been having sex in the first place. But I didn't know what he was talking about. I'm like, $500 for what? And he's like, well, for an abortion. And I was like, oh, is that what you want me to do? And he was like, yeah. And he kind of I knew him well enough that even just by hearing his voice, I knew it was like, duh. Like that kind of moment of just like, what else would you do?
Yeah, yeah.
And growing up, like anyone in my family will say, was a very strong person, a very confident person, very opinionated. And in that moment, it just all went away. I just felt so small, and I was just like, okay, I'll talk to you later. And looking back now, if I could, go back, and I would tell myself, stand up for yourself, advocate for yourself, advocate for your child, and say, I at least deserve a conversation. It shouldn't just be one person's say. So Chosen Night 1, Pastor Irene Rollins, who you've had on the show, she delivered a word called Reframe Your Shame. And she was sharing her personal story about her struggle with alcoholism and that whole journey for her. And when she was speaking, I'm like, this is great. I love this, but it doesn't apply to me. And all I kept telling myself was, I'm not an alcoholic. I don't have addiction. There's nothing in my life I have to be ashamed about. I just kept telling myself that. But in the back of my mind, I also knew, no, this message is for you. You absolutely have shame, and you might not be aware of it, but you absolutely have it. And at the end of her message, she did an altar call and encouraged anybody to go up to the front. She's like, she said, if you are bound by the shackles of shame and condemnation, I encourage you to come and get prayer. And so all around the room, I'm sitting in the top left side of the sanctuary. You know how big that place is. And so all around the room, I see these pairs of women coming out, and they're like the prayer team. And I look down and I see these two women, and before I could even tell my body to go, I just started walking. And I don't know, at the time, I was like, why am I going to the furthest women from me? There's people right here. But I was just walking down there, and I don't know how to explain it, but I was not telling myself, go there. I just went. They were like, hey, sweetheart, what's your name? And as soon as they asked me that, I lost it. Like, I fell to my knees. I was sobbing and just crying. And I don't know how long I was crying for, but eventually I did compose myself. And I didn't even tell them my name at first. I was just like, when I was 18 years old, I have an abortion, and I've kept it a secret for 10 years. Like, I literally said it that fast. Like, they were probably like, what? And so I said it again. I'm like, when I was 18 years old, I had an abortion. I've kept it a secret for 10 years. And the one lady to my right, she was like, oh, sweetheart. And she just hugged me like the most mothering, nurturing hug. And they laid hands on me and they prayed. They anointed my head with oil. And it was definitely a chain breaking prayer. Like, as they're praying for me, I just feel at first I'm like dejected. I'm standing there, like my head is down. And the one lady actually did like put her hand under my chin and kind of like raise my head. And so by the end of the prayer, I'm like standing up with my arms raised, like just, my whole physical being just like rose as they were praying. I could feel God's like love on me. And after they prayed, the woman to my right was like, sweetheart, I want you to know I've had 2 abortions. And she was like, God forgives me. He says he's set me free, and he's doing the same for you. And that's when I was like, that's why those angels pulled me to those 2 women, because I went to a woman that knew exactly how I was feeling. It's funny because I'm like not a conference person. I grew up in church, so I've been to many conferences, and I've felt that just the ones that I've been to have been more of like a pep talk, a motivational speech. Like I never, except for Priscilla Schreiber and Beth Moore, those are the 2 conferences I went to that I was like, the Holy Spirit was there. But Chosen, I'm like the biggest advocate for it, because but then I saw so many women just wrecked by God. And I feel like at Chosen, you can be vulnerable because you're surrounded by other women. And you just kind of feel like this sense of understanding, I can get down on my knees and cry, and I don't feel like anyone's looking at me like, what is she doing? But the speakers that they choose, I believe that they intentionally create an atmosphere for you to meet with God. And I would recommend anyone go if you have a chance to go. If you don't have a chance to go, I would recommend looking online and finding those sermons, because I do think that had I not gone to that conference, I might have gone another 10 years. I don't know what would have happened, but it definitely was. It was Pastor Irene Rollins, like her sermon, that really just convicted me. And I think God orchestrated it all for me to be here, everything.
I think it's for everyone. And I say that because I know I have friends who are just different types of women. Like, you look in that room of that 2,000 people and you see women who love hiking and they want to be outdoors and they like physical things. And you see women who are like, the closest I'm going to get to hiking is going to a Marriott near the woods. It's not for a certain type of woman. It's for who's hungry for the Lord, and he's going to meet you corporately. He's going to be there with us, and individually he's going to be there. So it's for everyone.
And I get most excited for the women that have resistance, that, have resistance to coming, that may be coming alone, or that may have to climb this mountain to go. I don't know if I'm a conference girl. Conferences really aren't my thing. I feel like that's when God specifically shows up even more powerfully. Even that was me last year. So I went to this pre-gathering that was like a night of prayer that Andy was holding to teach on prayer. And I just had a lot of resistance. I mean, I told her this afterwards, but I think I was longing for days gone by. I was thinking about my mom not being here anymore and these giants of the faith. And I was just thinking, gosh, they would have loved to be here. Julie Hyatt, to watch this moment in our church where there's this impartation on prayer. And I walked here because we were living in an apartment close by. I walked here and I just had so much resistance to coming, thinking like, what am I even doing? And it was in that moment that God met me in such a powerful way that shifted all of Chosen for me, and I just think, so for any woman that is listening that may be having this resistance already rise up in her of like, that's not for me, I can't take this time away, that's when I get the most excited and I just decide to kind of push the gas, just to let God surprise me.
Yeah. That's been one of I love when that happens. I'll be in a Christian faith environment where I have so much cynicism, and then the Holy Spirit just breaks in, and I'm like, well, that was definitely God, because I wasn't even here to receive,
That's right.
Man.
That's right.
So what I get the fact that I can't just show up to Chosen as a guy, because, it'd probably be, what are my motivations? You know what I'm saying? To want to go to a conference with just a bunch of women.
We're not scared of you, Joey. So you can come on in.
Let's say I'm just a John Doe or whatever, just a random person. What if I wanted to go to Chosen online? Could I register as Joey Svendsen and watch these teachers online if I wanted to?
I mean, I think so.
Would I have to put in Priscilla's name to get the pass?
No, I think the way that technically the system works is you just register. I mean, so it might be weird, but you could do it.
What's weird about me learning from women? What's weird about that?
It's not that you learning from women. It's just that it's a women's conference. So.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. Huh. But if you want to do it, Joey.
Yeah.
Josh still says his favorite Bible study was A Woman After God's Heart that Beth Moore wrote.
Yeah.
So I'm just saying, could be something special for people in it if they wanted to watch.
All right. I want to give you guys, to end this show, I want to give y'all, it's a simple question.
Natasha.
My response, I'm sorry, y'all looking at me because, Joey, go ahead. I don't know what you're going to say. I feel like I'm not prepared to answer anything. I'm just not.
You've done a great job not being prepared.
Okay.
Who was the better basketball player?
Oh, come on.
Eric Dickerson or Bo Jackson?
Basketball?
Yeah, who was the better basketball player?
Bo Jackson played basketball?
Baseball.
Katie? I
mean, I just agree with them, whatever they're saying. My boys would be so
Bo
mortified
Jackson
right
is
now.
Football and baseball, right? I don't remember him playing basketball.
Natasha.
Look out. You knew that too?
Yeah, I didn't know football, but I thought baseball for Bo Jackson.
What about Eric Dickerson?
I have no idea who that is.
Okay, they're both football players. You guys, good job.
Wow.
Y'all just took Bo Jackson.
A trick question,
Yeah, that
Joey.
was.
Hey,
He was like, that was... Okay, I'm going to do a woman's episode, and then I'm going to stereotypically ask them a sports question.
Would you sit down with 3 dudes and do the same thing I just did?
No. Why?
Not? For fun.
Ask.
Do y'all think we could even come up with one? A stereotypical female question?
Yeah.
That would
Oh my
stop
gosh.
Joey?
Something about fashion?
Yeah,
for
that's
sure.
true. Come up with a lot.
Oh, well, Lynne wouldn't be able to think of a fashion.
Fashion.
Yeah, I know nothing about menopause from experience.
Yes.
We can find that thing. We can do it.
Well, actually, I grew up in a household where my mom had menopause, so I kind of know a little bit.
You kind of.
Did you know that she was going through it, though?
No, you don't.
Did you know that she was going through menopause?
Oh, I knew she was going through something. I knew that. Lord knows we all knew.
Goodness, there was a switch, right? Something happened.
I love you, Mom.
Thank you for joining us for the Things You Won't Hear on Sunday Seacoast Church podcast. We just had a great time. And hey, during that episode, you heard us talking about Chosen Women's Conference and the impact that it's had on us throughout the years. And this year is going to be no different. And we're really excited because this year specifically, we have designed a customized online experience. So no matter where you are in the world, you get to experience Chosen just like you were in person, because what we know is that God is not just moving in the room. He's going to move wherever you are. And so we, just like Natasha said, that one of the things that she's experienced through Chosen is those connections with other women. We've designed opportunities for you to connect with other women online during the conference and after the conference ends. And so I want to encourage you, go to chosenwomensconference.com, purchase your online ticket, grab some other ladies to have a watch party with you. It's going to be an incredible experience. But most importantly, like Katie said, come hungry. Come expectant. God is going to meet you right where you are. And so you can find the link to chosenwomensconference.com in the show notes. And in the show notes, you can also find a link to our Facebook group for the podcast, where you can continue these conversations about episodes, hear about upcoming content, and also hear about guests that we might have coming in the future. So be sure to check out our show notes. And as always, subscribe to the podcast so that you can be sure to get these episodes as soon as they are released.